Nicole had completely lost control and become something unrecognizable. Though he seemed to calm seeing Kuzuhamon, he'd been shot in the back by Yggdrasil, and his Digimon form deteriorated slowly as he'd returned to human form, while Sister Mont Blanc and Marine Angemon did everything they could to save the Digidestined leader from his wound. It was now up to Nicole on whether or not they would survive. He'd woken up in a strange void with stars and encountered two strange featureless entities, and was told that he now had a choice to make, as a road that forked off appeared in front of them, and he slowly floated down onto it. The second then told him to remember that he can only take one path, so he needed to choose wisely because there was no going back. The entities began to speak to him one at a time, with the first one saying that he should take the path towards order to protect the rest of their friends so that they do not lose anyone else. The second one told him that Yggdrasil killed his friend. They killed Panjamon. Shouldn't they have their revenge for that? Choose the path of vengeance and kill Yggdrasil for what they've done, for everything they've done. Nicole looked annoyed as the two were trying to influence his choice, being told that he needed to choose a path. He honestly didn't like either choice, seeing down them, and instead chose to simply sit down. The second entity questioned what he thought he was doing, and our Digidestined leader just told them to shut up, as he'd stretched out onto the road, using his arms as a pillow to lay there and think. The first entity seemed just as confused as the second one, as Nicole refused to take either path. It's as if he was starting to relax, despite the two trying to influence the choice he made. The first entity said that it mattered not what he did. Ultimately, he must choose a path and stick to it. The second actually agreed about that, saying that he had to choose one and couldn't simply turn back no matter what he did. Our Digidestined leader then told them both to shut up, as he laid there thinking about which one would be the right choice for him personally. He thought about everything that happened, from the lights in the sky that brought him to the digital world, to the death of Panjamon, and everything in between. There was one thing that he knew for sure in all of this, and thought about her. While all this was going on, Kuzuhamon was staying close to Nicole inside the shack, worried about her lover, as she couldn't help but cry after what had happened. Upset as tears were streaming down her face, she continued to sob beside him, crying into her arms, worried that he wouldn't pull through after what Yggdrasil had done. She cried for him to come back to her in a desperate tone. Cutting back to the leader of the Digidestined, he'd started to hear Kuzuhamon's sobs and slowly stood up, listening closer to her to hear the sound better. The two entities took notice that Nicole had stood up, and the first questioned if he had made a decision. The second reminding him that he had to choose a path and stick with it, asking which would it be, revenge? The first then picked up where the second left off and added or order at the end of the question to see which one he chose. The second told him that once he chose a path, there was no going back and to think carefully, though Nicole simply looked at the two and then turned around and walked away from the fork in the road. The second demanded to know what he was doing, and our leader looked at the featureless form before smirking, saying, "I'm going back," before jumping off the end of the road and back into the void. The second questioned if he was allowed to do that, and the first says that it appeared he just did, and they followed after Nicole to see what he was doing. The first questioned where he was going, and Nicole told them that he's taking his own path, as he doesn't like either of them. This just served to make them even more confused, as our leader of the Digidestined began glowing in a strange yet calm blaze, changing his form in that space. The blaze grew brighter and brighter with a triumphant light, blinding the two entities as their featureless shadowy forms were burned away from this light. We then see Nicole laying in the shack as he started to cough, slowly sitting up, with Kuzuhamon watching him slowly rise up until he'd sat up completely, then hugged him, though he was still injured and it hurt a bit for her to do so, making his lover apologize when he let out a pained sound. Nicole then slowly started to stand, despite Kuzuhamon worrying and trying to get him to rest. He told her that there's no time for that so long as Yggdrasil is still in power, and proceeded to walk out of the shack where the groups were discussing their game plan and trying to decide who would be in charge of leading the united group against their so-called god. Nicole unleashed a strange blaze like none that had seen before, though this one was focused and calm. Something appeared inside of it, opening up as if an eye peering at the group. Though this time the symbol was calm and controlled, completely in focus. It was the form of an eye with the Omega symbol as a part of its appearance. Everyone stopped, turning towards the burning symbol, and looked surprised seeing that Nicole was up already. And what's more, he seemed stronger than ever, if his blaze was anything to go by. Our Digidestined leader then said that he would be leading the charge against Yggdrasil, and doesn't plan on making the same mistake twice, as the blaze around him began to take something akin to some new shape before flowing back into Nicole. Alphamon slowly nodded and conceded temporary leadership of the Royal Knights over to Nicole until they've beaten Yggdrasil. They turn towards the Mao, and Lucimon says that he too will do the same and concede leadership of the 7 great demon lords of the Mao over to Nicole as well. Our Digidestined leader then nodded and began telling them the plan for how to take down that so-called god of the digital world.